Imagine a man whose life is a trail of destruction. His name is synonymous with violence, theft, and drugs. A man whose every step seemed to leave chaos in its wake. A career criminal, arrested 5 times. Yet each time, the system failed to hold him accountable. But one fateful day, he took the life of someone who had everything to live for. A young woman, a fresh medical doctor, full of promise and potential. Her dreams shattered, her life forever stolen. Her name was Emma Matthews. And that was the day everything changed. The day Ryan Dixon's reign of terror came to an end. This is the story of how a career criminal's destructive path led to one final, tragic moment. A life destroyed, a family torn apart, and the system once again failed to deliver justice. But this time, there was no escape. Ryan Dixon would pay the price. But how? Stay with us as we uncover the full story of the crime, the aftermath, and the fight for justice that followed. It's a story that will make you question everything. If you believe justice should always prevail, hit that subscribe button. Only those who side with injustice will hesitate. Ryan Dixon, an African-American man in his late 30s, a name that sent chills down the spine of anyone who knew it. A man whose very existence was tied to a legacy of destruction. A career criminal, Ryan's violent path began in his late teens, and it never stopped. For years, he had been a ghost in the system. A criminal who always managed to slip through the cracks. A man who had tasted freedom one too many times. It wasn't just the arrests. It wasn't just the violent crimes he committed. It was the way he manipulated the system, the way he made it so that, no matter how many times they caught him, he was always released. Ryan's life was a string of petty crimes, each more brazen than the last. His first offense? Petty theft, just a teenager. Grabbing what he could from stores, taking what wasn't his. Then came the car hijackings. Cars stolen in broad daylight. Ryan, growing bolder, more reckless. Each crime adding another mark to his ever-growing criminal record. Yet somehow, every time, the system failed to keep him behind bars. And then, the drugs. Ryan got deeper into the criminal world, dealing on the streets, selling to anyone who'd buy. The money, the power, it all fueled his growing sense of entitlement. But what Ryan didn't realize was that his luck was about to run out. He had been let go time and time again. Every arrest, every charge, just a mere bump in the road. But how many chances could one man get? And how many more lives would be destroyed in the process? The system, his system, had failed him before. But this time, it was different. Ryan Dixon had always escaped justice. But the deeper he fell into the criminal world, the more dangerous he became. What would it take to finally stop him? As his crimes escalated, Ryan's sense of invincibility grew. But little did he know, a chance encounter with a young woman would change everything. Could he escape this time? Or would he finally face the consequences of his actions? Comment. No more second chances for criminals if you're not okay with a system that lets monsters like Ryan get away with their crimes. In 2021, Ryan's violence escalated. No longer content with petty thefts or street-level crimes, Ryan crossed a line he couldn't return from. He kidnapped a young woman, 26-year-old Emma Matthews, a bright, dedicated medical student with a future full of promise. Emma wasn't just another person walking through life. She was on the verge of achieving her dreams, a woman who had spent years studying, working tirelessly to become a doctor, determined to make a difference in the world. Her family, who had sacrificed so much to support her, could already see the incredible life ahead of her. The future they had hoped for, the legacy they believed she would leave. But one cold, tragic night, all of that was ripped away in an instant. Emma Matthews was known for her drive. Her passion for medicine was evident in everything she did. She wasn't just studying to become a doctor. She was driven by a deep desire to help others, to heal, to save lives. Her family had invested everything in her education, Every dollar, every moment of their lives was spent with one goal: to see Emma achieve greatness, to watch her give back to the world, to see their sacrifices pay off. But when Ryan's path collided with hers, that future was no longer possible. What happened that night would change everything. Emma's dreams, her family's hopes, all vanished in the blink of an eye. What could have been done to prevent this? How could Ryan have been stopped before he shattered so many lives? The night of Emma's kidnapping. She had been finishing her shift at the hospital, exhausted but proud of the work she had done. She was looking forward to seeing her family that evening, to relax, to share a meal. But that night, fate would take a dark turn. Ryan had been lurking, waiting for the perfect moment. He spotted Emma walking to her car, alone in the parking lot. In a flash, he struck. He forced her into his car at gunpoint, dragging her into the darkness. What followed was a horrifying scene. Ryan took Emma to an abandoned warehouse, where he held her captive, terrifying her with threats of violence. Emma, terrified but strong, tried to fight back. But her attacker was relentless, his cruelty unmasked for the first time. Emma's strength in the face of horror would become a memory of how her bright future was stolen. How could someone like Ryan, with a history of violence, still be free to commit such horrors? As Emma's family began to realize what had happened, the heartbreak and devastation were unbearable. But they had no idea yet that this would only be the beginning. Ryan's crime was just the tip of the iceberg, a warning of the terror he was about to unleash. Hit like if you can't stand criminals who destroy families, and subscribe if you think it's time to fix the justice system. As time passed, Ryan's crimes became more brazen, more vicious. What started as petty thefts and street-level drug deals spiraled into violent, premeditated acts, each one leaving a trail of broken lives in its wake. Crime number 1: car thefts and violent assaults. Ryan was no longer content with the small-time crimes of his youth. His gang began stealing cars, often targeting the elderly or unsuspecting people who had nothing left to defend themselves with. At first, it was quick: grab the car, take the valuables, and leave. But soon, Ryan's violence took a darker turn. When a man tried to stop them one evening in early spring, Ryan didn't hesitate. He grabbed the man, threw him to the ground, and kicked him in the ribs until he couldn't move. The victim, gasping for breath, had no way to fight back against the rage in Ryan's eyes. The man would survive, but the mental scars were forever. It wasn't the first violent encounter, nor the last. Ryan's gang began to target anyone who dared stop them. Victims were left bloodied, bruised, and traumatized. But Ryan remained untouchable. Each attack grew worse, and each victim's screams were drowned out by the system's indifference. With each car stolen, each victim bruised, Ryan learned that the world was his playground. But the more the system let him get away with, the more it empowered him. How long could this continue before someone stood up to him? Crime number 2: drug dealing and exploitation. Ryan's criminal empire wasn't just about cars or quick thefts. No, he had a much darker plan: drugs. Ryan, along with his accomplices, began distributing drugs throughout the neighborhoods, exploiting vulnerable people who had nowhere to turn. He sold to anyone who had cash in hand, knowing full well that the cycle of addiction would keep his business booming. But it wasn't just about the money, it was about control. He didn't just sell drugs, he controlled lives. He knew how to manipulate, how to break people down until they were nothing but shells of their former selves, living only for the next hit. Every life he touched seemed to wither. But as long as the money flowed in, Ryan felt invincible. The destruction wasn't just about property, it was about people. Ryan wasn't just selling drugs, he was breaking spirits. But in the midst of this growing empire, Ryan still found a way to slip through the system. Would he finally face the consequences for his actions? Each time Ryan was arrested, it was as if the system was determined to fail him. He was caught red-handed with stolen vehicles, with drugs in his possession. Yet time and time again, he avoided the harsh penalties that most would have faced. Instead of jail time, he was offered plea deals, A little bit of time served, a reduction in charges, and back on the streets, free to continue his destruction. And the more this happened, the bolder Ryan became. The system designed to protect people had become an accomplice in his crimes. Every time he walked free, Ryan grew more arrogant, more reckless. He believed the system was powerless to stop him. And for a long time he was right. With each plea deal, Ryan's confidence grew. He was untouchable, or so he thought. But with his next crime, he would push too far, and this time, the system might not let him slip away. Ryan's arrogance reached its peak. He thought he was invincible. But what he didn't know was that his next crime would change everything. Would this be the crime that finally brought him down? Or would Ryan slip through the cracks again? Don't let criminals like Ryan win. Share this video if you believe no one should get away with such destruction. Ryan Graves was no stranger to danger. But as his crimes grew more violent, something else grew as well: his arrogance. He had been arrested countless times, each time slipping through the cracks of the system. But it wasn't just bad luck. It was something far darker at play. Ryan had learned how to manipulate the system. He had connections that allowed him to evade the punishment he so richly deserved. As a young man, Ryan had learned quickly that the system wasn't always as bulletproof as it seemed. By the time he was in his late 20s, he had established ties to corrupt officials, lawyers, judges, even police officers who could look the other way, who could ensure that his records were wiped clean or his charges reduced. And every time he faced the law, the system failed to hold him accountable. Ryan was clever. He knew how to play the game. He understood the loopholes, the delays in the judicial process, the short-term plea deals that reduced his sentences, the backdoor negotiations that kept him out of prison. For years, he had been able to buy his way out of consequences, using his earnings from the drug deals, the car thefts, and his other illegal activities to pay off those who could help him. Every time Ryan faced arrest, the system seemed to fail him. A slap on the wrist, a brief stay in jail, and then freedom once again. His confidence soared with each escape, but as his crimes escalated, so did the danger. Would this time be any different? Or was the system still too broken to stop him? Ryan's confidence was no longer just about his ability to avoid the law. It had become a way of life. He started seeing himself as untouchable, immune to the consequences of his actions. But there was one problem. His crimes were getting bigger, more violent, more dangerous. His latest spree was a brazen attempt to push his luck further than ever before. Ryan didn't care anymore. He wasn't just a petty criminal. He was a man who believed he was above the law, and every time he walked free, his sense of invincibility grew. As Ryan's empire of crime continued to expand, so did his contempt for the very system that was supposed to hold him accountable. He wasn't just selling drugs, he was destroying lives. He wasn't just stealing cars, he was terrorizing entire communities. He knew the system had let him slip through the cracks for years, and with every escape, he became more brazen. But what if this time was different? What if his confidence was leading him down a path he couldn't escape? Ryan had always walked the line between being caught and getting away with it. But with each crime, the stakes grew higher. His actions were no longer just hurting individuals, they were putting entire families in jeopardy. Could the system still be manipulated? Or was Ryan's perfect escape about to end in a way he never expected? Ryan's next crime would leave an irreversible mark on the justice system, and it would involve his final victim. A tragedy that would spark outrage, a tragedy that would change everything. But the question remained, would this finally be the crime that broke him? Or would he once again slip through the cracks, untouchable, and free to continue his reign of terror? September 2021 was supposed to be a night like any other for Emma Matthews, a 6-year-old medical student passionate about her future and determined to make a difference in the world. She had just finished a late study session at the university and was looking forward to meeting some friends at a nearby cafe for a quick break. Emma's life was full of promise. Her family had invested everything in her education. She was on the path to become a doctor, someone who would help countless people, someone who had already made a difference in the lives of those who knew her. She had no idea, no way of knowing that the person she would cross paths with that evening would be the one to take everything from her. Ryan Dixon, fresh from his latest criminal spree, was nearby. He had just pulled off a robbery, and his usual sense of invincibility was in full force. He was on the run, feeling the heat from his latest crime. But still, he saw opportunity he always did. It was by chance, or perhaps by fate, that Emma stepped out of the cafe just as Ryan was passing by. Their paths crossed for only a brief moment, but that was enough. That brief moment was all it took for Ryan to make her his next victim. Emma didn't see it coming. She didn't know that the man she passed on the street, just another face in the crowd, was a career criminal, a predator who had slipped through the cracks of the justice system one too many times. Ryan, seeing an opportunity, quickly approached Emma. He pulled her into a nearby alley away from the bustling crowd. Before she could react, he overpowered her. Emma struggled, but Ryan was stronger, more desperate. He was out of control, and in his twisted mind, he believed that no one could stop him. The attack was brutal. Ryan forced Emma into the back of his car, holding her at gunpoint as he drove to a remote location. Emma, terrified but determined to survive, tried to reason with him. She pleaded, begged him to let her go. But Ryan's cold, calculating mind had already made up its decision. As they drove, Emma's thoughts were a mix of fear, disbelief, and sorrow. She had worked so hard to get to this point, and now, all of that was being taken away by a man who had no respect for life, no regard for the dreams of others. Emma's fate was sealed as the night unfolded. What had started as an ordinary evening had turned into a nightmare that she would never wake from. But what drove Ryan to commit such an unforgivable act? Ryan's violence knew no bounds. He had already committed countless crimes, but this time, this crime was different. He had crossed a line he could never return from. After driving Emma to an isolated area, he forced her out of the car. The final moments of her life were filled with nothing but terror and desperation. Emma fought with everything she had left, but it wasn't enough. In the end, Ryan's rage won out. He took her life, ending a future that had just begun. Emma's body was found the next day, lifeless and broken. A stark contrast to the vibrant woman who had once been so full of life. Her family, her mother, her father couldn't believe what had happened. The dreams they had for her future, the hope they had invested in her, were gone in an instant. Emma's death would mark a turning point in this story, a breaking point for both the justice system and the people who had been fighting for change. But what would it take for Ryan Dixon to finally face the consequences of his actions? Ryan had crossed a line from which there would be no return. The search for him was no longer just about one woman's tragic death. It had become a nationwide manhunt. And this time, Ryan would have nowhere to hide. Comment, "Justice for Emma," if you believe the system failed her, and that no one should ever be forgotten like this. The morning after Emma's body was discovered, the police launched a full investigation into her murder. They knew this case wasn't just another statistic. It was the kind of case that demanded answers, that demanded justice. And this time, they had to make sure Ryan Dixon couldn't slip through the cracks. Ryan's name, already known to law enforcement, quickly became the focus of the investigation. The detectives combed through his past, uncovering a long list of offenses, assaults, robberies, car thefts, and countless other violent acts that had remained unresolved. But this was different. This time, they weren't going to let him get away. Ryan's violent behavior had been a pattern for years. It was clear that Emma's tragic death wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of years of failed justice, a lifetime of chances that should have been stopped long ago. The detectives quickly connected the dots between Ryan's past and the murder of Emma. They tracked down past victims who had experienced similar acts of violence, people who had been attacked, robbed, and left in fear for their lives. And as the victims came forward, their stories painted a picture of a man who had been allowed to destroy lives without consequence. For the first time, the justice system was starting to look at Ryan's history, and it wasn't a pretty picture. The repeated failures, the missed opportunities to stop him, these were the things that had allowed him to continue his rampage. But the police were not just dealing with Ryan's criminal record. They were also dealing with the growing grief of Emma's family. Her parents, heartbroken and in shock, began advocating for justice, demanding that the system finally hold Ryan accountable for his actions. They weren't going to let Emma's death be just another unsolved case. They were determined to make sure the world knew what happened to their daughter. For the first time in Ryan Dixon's life, it seemed like his past was finally catching up with him. But the question remained, was it too late? Could justice be served, or was Ryan still going to escape the consequences of his actions? As the investigation grew more intense, the police uncovered new evidence, surveillance footage from nearby cameras, witness statements, and forensic evidence that could tie Ryan directly to Emma's murder. This time, they had everything they needed to make the case stick. But even as the police closed in on him, Ryan was still on the run. He had disappeared after Emma's murder, and the clock was ticking. With each passing hour, it felt like the possibility of him slipping away once more was becoming all too real. The tension was palpable. For once, it seemed like Ryan's escape from justice might not be so easy. But would they catch him in time? Or would he slip away again, leaving another victim in his wake? The search for Ryan was intensifying. The authorities had their sights set on him, but the question remained, would they find him before he could destroy yet another life? The hunt was on, but time was running out. Smash the like button if you're ready to see Ryan pay for his crimes. The investigation is just heating up. After months of searching, the day finally arrived. Ryan Dixon, the man who had evaded justice for so long, was captured. But the real question was it too little, too late? Ryan had been on the run, slipping through every attempt to catch him. But now, the end was near. Law enforcement had tracked him down. His time of freedom was over. The arrest wasn't easy. Ryan had a history of running, and this time, he wasn't going to go down quietly. He tried to escape, to flee from the consequences of his actions, but this time there was no getting away. The authorities, having pieced together his every move, finally cornered him. It was a dramatic scene, with the police moving in fast, an ambush, carefully planned, after weeks of relentless searching. Ryan fought back, as he always had, with an arrogance that came from knowing the system had let him slip by time and time again. But this time, no amount of evasion would save him. As Ryan was handcuffed, the world seemed to exhale a collective sigh of relief. Emma's family, who had suffered for so long, finally felt like justice might be within reach. But would it be enough? Could the years of pain be undone by one arrest? Emma's family stood on the sidelines as Ryan was taken into custody. Relief was written all over their faces. But so was the anger. How had it taken so long to catch him? How many lives had been destroyed because of the system's inability to hold Ryan accountable? They had been waiting for this moment, for a justice that had long been delayed, but never forgotten. The community, devastated by the loss of Emma, gathered around. It was bittersweet. Yes, Ryan had been caught, but the damage had already been done. Emma was gone. And the question on everyone's mind was, why had it taken so long for the justice system to get it right? Ryan's capture was just the beginning of something much larger. He had finally been caught, but his trial would soon become a public spectacle. The media, the victims, the public, they would all demand answers. Would Ryan face the full consequences of his actions, or would the system allow him to slip away again? This was the moment they'd all been waiting for. But as the trial approached, there was one burning question left to answer. Would the truth come out? Would the justice system finally fulfill its promise of accountability? Or would this just be another case where the truth became a casualty of the system? Subscribe if you're rooting for justice. Only those who condone crime would choose to ignore what's happening here. Ryan's trial was unlike any other. The courtroom was packed, the media was on high alert, and the public was watching with bated breath. The eyes of the nation were on the trial. The case had caught the public's attention in a way that no one could have predicted. Emma's murder wasn't just another tragedy. It was the symbol of everything wrong with the justice system. And now, the question was, would this system finally deliver the justice that Emma and so many others deserved? The courtroom buzzed with tension as each day passed. Emma's family was there, sitting in the front row, their eyes locked on Ryan as he sat in the defendant's chair. Their faces were a mixture of grief and anger, emotions that had been buried since Emma's murder, but now resurfaced with each passing day of the trial. Every time Emma's family took the stand, the room fell silent. Their words, filled with pain and loss, echoed through the courtroom. They spoke of the daughter they'd lost, the dreams they'd once had for her, and the future that had been stolen. They spoke of the toll it had taken on them, not just emotionally, but physically, as they relived every horrific moment of Emma's death. Her mother, her father, even her younger brother, they all stood before the court, their voices cracking as they recalled their last moments with Emma. It was raw, it was painful, and it was impossible for anyone in that courtroom not to feel the weight of their loss. Ryan, on the other hand, sat there, stoic, unyielding. His face, cold and unreadable, gave no hint of remorse. His defense team worked hard to downplay his role, focusing on his upbringing, his troubled past, and even attempting to paint him as a victim of circumstances. They tried to explain away his violent tendencies, his long history of crime, his complete lack of conscience. But the prosecution was relentless. The prosecution fought for the full extent of justice. They wanted Ryan to pay for every life he had destroyed, every moment of pain he had caused. But with the defense fighting just as hard to minimize his culpability, the real question was, could this trial actually deliver the justice that Emma and so many others deserved? Ryan's defense team threw everything they could at the case, attempting to discredit witnesses, to reduce the charges, to show that he wasn't as bad as everyone thought he was. But the public was not buying it. The outrage was palpable. The anger in the courtroom was not just for Emma. It was for every victim who had been failed by the system. The public wasn't just demanding justice for Emma. They were demanding accountability for a justice system that had allowed Ryan to slip away for so long. The final verdict was nearing, and the tension in the courtroom could be felt by anyone watching. The weight of the decision hung in the air. Would Ryan finally get the punishment he deserved, or would the broken system let him go free again? The question loomed over the trial, casting a shadow over every word spoken. The courtroom awaited the decision that would determine whether justice would finally be served. The public watched in silence, knowing that whatever happened in this courtroom would set a precedent for how the justice system would handle career criminals moving forward. This trial was more than just about one man, it was about the integrity of the system itself. And with each passing moment, it seemed more and more likely that the outcome of this trial would have consequences that extended far beyond Ryan's fate. With Ryan's trial coming to a close, something powerful began to rise from the ashes of this tragedy. A movement, born from the pain and loss of Emma's family, was starting to take shape, a movement that could change the future for countless victims. The grief-stricken, yet determined, family of Emma Matthews didn't just want justice. They wanted change. Real, lasting change. The kind of change that would prevent other families from experiencing the same devastation they had. This wasn't just about Ryan anymore. It was about every career criminal who slipped through the cracks. About every victim who had been failed by a broken system. Emma's family began advocating for a new law, one that would specifically target repeat offenders like Ryan. They called it Emma's Law, a law designed to ensure that violent criminals, those with a history of repeated offenses, would no longer be allowed to walk free. It was a law that would guarantee life sentences for anyone with a proven track record of violence, making it clear that the justice system would no longer tolerate this kind of failure. News outlets picked up the story, and the public rallied behind Emma's family, but with support came resistance. Politicians and legal experts, entrenched in their ways, began to push back against the proposed law. They claimed it would overcrowd prisons, increase costs, and disrupt the very foundation of the justice system. Some even went as far as to suggest that Emma's tragic death was just another statistic in a broken system. Despite the resistance, Emma's family wasn't backing down. They held press conferences, lobbied lawmakers, and organized rallies. Every opportunity they got, they reminded the world that the system had failed them and it was time for that to change. They knew that if this law didn't pass, countless other families would face the same heartbreak they had endured. As their campaign gained traction, it wasn't just about Emma's family anymore. It was about a growing movement, a national outcry. Social media exploded with support for Emma's Law. People from all over the country were standing with Emma's family, sharing their stories, demanding change. The hashtag number Emma's Law trended, and soon, Even some lawmakers who had previously opposed the bill began to listen. For the first time, the issue of career criminals slipping through the cracks was being taken seriously. Could this movement actually lead to meaningful change? Could Emma's Law become a reality? Or would the system remain just as broken as it had always been, leaving families like Emma's to pick up the pieces while the criminals walked free? Meanwhile, Ryan sat in jail, awaiting his fate, his defense team trying desperately to minimize his role in Emma's death. But the public wasn't just watching his trial anymore. They were watching a much bigger battle unfold. The battle for justice, for reform, for a law that could change the future. Would Emma's family's fight for justice result in a law that could prevent another tragedy like Emma's? Or would the forces working against them succeed in tearing down their efforts, leaving the system just as broken as it was before? The stakes were high, and the future was uncertain. The fate of Emma's Law hung in the balance, and everything depended on what happened next. If you want to see real change, share this video. Let's put pressure on the system to protect future victims. Emma Matthews was more than just a victim. Her death was the spark that ignited a fire that refused to be extinguished. What started as a tragedy, a brutal, senseless act, evolved into something far more powerful than anyone could have anticipated. It became a movement. The fight for justice didn't stop with her family's heartbreak. It became a fight for every victim, every person who had ever been failed by a broken system. Emma's murder wasn't just another case, it was the catalyst for a nationwide demand for change. The question on everyone's mind became, how many more families had to endure this kind of devastation before something was done? Emma's family, devastated by their loss, made it their mission to ensure no other family would have to face what they had. They began a tireless campaign, one that would take them across the country, speaking out, rallying support, pushing for change. But it wasn't just about passing Emma's Law, it was about fixing a system that had repeatedly failed so many others. Her death had opened the eyes of the public. People across the nation began to rally behind the cause, with some seeing Emma's family not just as victims, but as symbols of resilience, of the fight for justice. They became the faces of a larger movement, a call for reform that was impossible to ignore. Despite all the progress, the road ahead wasn't easy. Emma's Law faced political opposition from figures who didn't want to change the system. The argument was simple. Change could disrupt the balance of justice. But to Emma's family, and countless others, this was no longer just about laws and policies. It was about human lives, about safety, and about justice. The system, they argued, had let Ryan Dixon slip through the cracks for too long. And now, with Emma's death as the painful example, they refused to let that happen again. But as with every fight for justice, the path was full of obstacles. Their fight wasn't over, and for the public, the question loomed. Would Emma's Law become the turning point for change? Or would the system, once again, fail to protect the very people it was meant to serve? Emma's story had sparked a fire, but would the flame burn bright enough to force real change? Will we see the justice Emma deserved? Or will her death be yet another tragedy, forgotten in the system's failure? The battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. Emma's family had found their voice, but would it be enough to change the broken system? Could their grief and their relentless fight for justice actually make a difference? Emma's death is a reminder that justice isn't just about what happens in the courtroom. It's a fight worth having, no matter how long it takes. The broken system must be fixed, not for one person, but for every victim who has been failed by it. Emma's family continues to fight for that change, and it's a fight we all need to join. Will Emma's Law pass? Will a system finally work the way it's supposed to? The fight for justice isn't over. Join us in making sure her story doesn't fade into the background, but inspires change that lasts forever. Stay with us for the next chapter in this ongoing battle for justice. Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like Emma's stories that need to be heard. The fight for justice isn't over. It's only just beginning. Will we see the system change? Will Emma's family ever find peace? Thank you for joining us in this powerful journey for justice. If you believe that no one should get away with crimes like these, hit that subscribe button and share this video with others who need to hear this story. Your support can make a difference. Let's stand together for a safer, fairer world. You can also leave a comment below and let us know what you think needs to change in the system. Remember, every voice counts in the fight for justice. Thank you once again for watching. We appreciate each and every one of you for being part of this community. If this story moved you, don't forget to check out our other videos, where we continue to share real, heartbreaking stories that need to be told. Stay tuned, stay vigilant, and together, let's make sure the voices of the victims are heard. Until next time, stay safe and keep fighting for justice.